The MCU has a brand new villain in theaters this week named GOR the God Butcher, played by the phenomenal Christian Bale. So in today's video, we're going to be ranking every single MCU movie villain from worst to best. Now, we are not including the shows, but if for some reason one of these villains did happen to show up in one of the shows and get development from there, then that development will take place in here. But in today's video, we're strictly only talking about the movie so far. So no Kang the Conqueror, no random person from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, can't even remember her name, but it should be a fun video, and I can't wait to get your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section, so leave a comment down there, as well as hit that like and subscribe button for more fun content like this over here on a daily basis. Starting out this list, at my number 27, we have Whiplash. Now, Whiplash, in theory, is a pretty cool designed villain. You have Mcu Villain playing the villain, which is great casting. When you look at the overall film and the product of it, the villain really isn't that great. Whiplash, for me, when you look at it, is a cool antagonist in theory to having great action sequences, but amounts to nothing more than just that. He's cannon fodder. For me, he is the worst villain out of all the MCU, just for the same main fact of he doesn't literally do anything really, besides get some cool little whippy moves here and there. Now at my number 26, we have Malekith. I've always gone back and forth with Malekith as my least favorite or my favorite. Now, maybe it's because I just got done reading some of the Thor comics leading into Thor Love and Thunder, that Malekith for me is kind of a cooler villain, because I really like Malekith in the comics, and that's the only last thing in the frame of my mind. But then when I do try and go back and rewatch Thor the Dark World, you go, yeah, this isn't good at all. And a lot of that sucks because you get a phenomenal actor playing Malekith, and then you watch it and you're like, it's just not really that memorable. The Dark Elves are really cool in the comics, and I wish they would actually bring them back and maybe give them some retribution. Sadly, they won't. The only reason I have Malekith one tier above Whiplash is just for the fact that there is an Infinity Stone in this film, and it does tie into the overarching nature of Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, and all sorts of elements like that. But other than that, Malekith is really not that great of a villain. And a lot of these movie villains you see at the bottom of this list, I'm not going to have much to say about them because the films really didn't have much to say about them either. My number 25, we have Yon-Rogg from Captain Marvel, played by Jude Law. Now, Jude Law turns in a pretty damn good performance, but for me, when you look at this character, there's really not much to him. And just looking at Captain Marvel, the full film as a whole doesn't have too many memorable moments for me personally. And when you look at Yon-Rogg, I remember him getting his ass kicked at the very end, him doing some cool things in the beginning, and then all in the middle, he's kind of just missing overall. There's not much to this film that really much brings that intriguing antagonist to me, and Yon-Rogg for me is kind of a slog. Now we're at my number 24, which is Abomination, which I actually expect after She-Hulk for this character to probably be bumped up. And you have Tim Roth, who is an amazing actor, and honestly, every little tidbit we've ever gotten of Abomination in the MCU, which so far is only Shang-Chi, and of course the first Incredible Hulk, it's pretty badass. The action sequences with Abomination are just pulse-pounding awesomeness, but besides that, there's not much an emotional range for Abomination, and not much for us to truly care about what his purpose is in the MCU. Now again, I do believe that I think She-Hulk, since it is confirmed that Tim Roth will be playing Abomination again, it'll be interesting to see the developments that we have in there, maybe if we do start to like his villain a little bit more. Other than that, Abomination is just a badass to watch kick ass on screen, and nothing more than that. We're at my number 23, which is Ronan the Accuser. Now, I actually don't mind Ronan all too much, but every time you go back to rewatch the Guardians of the Galaxy film, he is easily the weakest part about it all. And looking at Captain Marvel, I completely forget that he's in that film half the time. Now, I think Lee Pace is a phenomenally well-acted actor, and this guy kills it in a lot of the different roles, and I actually think if it wasn't for him, I actually think Ronan would be way lower on this list. But due to his performance and due to some of the elements of Ronan and in general what he wants to do in this society and even try and betray Thanos to a certain extent, he's an interesting villain that just doesn't get much to do in Guardians of the Galaxy because they already have to further out a bunch of other characters and they can't really dedicate too much time to him himself. At my number 22, we have Drekykov and Taskmaster. Now I combine these two together because To be honest, without Taskmaster, you don't really have Drekykov, and Drekykov, for me, while an intimidating foe, he needs Taskmaster the same way, so they go hand in hand. The Taskmaster is one of my favorite villains from the comics, and I was not too satisfied with what they decided to do in the MCU with this new interpretation. And it doesn't happen to be because she is played by a girl. I'm totally fine with that. It's just the fact that Taskmaster really much is just a mind-controlled villain, and that sucks because in the comics and in other interpretations of this character, whether video games or shows, Taskmaster has always been such a badass character, and there is badass elements to Taskmaster. I just didn't get what I wanted from this character. I like the power set, I like things like that. Maybe in the future, if they decide to use Taskmaster in a different way, I might come to appreciate it a little bit more. But between her and Drekykov, it just really much didn't work out too much for me. And the weakest element of Black Widow was hands down the villain. Speaking out villains, at my number 21, we also have another combined villain, which is Adrian, Killian, and of course, the Mandarin, Trevor Slattery. So now this is not the original version of the Mandarin. Kind of gets a bump after seeing Shang-Chi. But even with that said, I'm not the biggest fan of these two in particular. Iron Man 3, a lot of people have a lot of issues with, and a lot of that just comes down to the villain. Killian is very much a bland villain itself with some cool power sets. I put this one up a little bit higher just because I do appreciate the twist that Shane Black went for. Even if it doesn't completely work, I think it works as a Shane Black movie, and I do enjoy this film overall. And I think the villains, while not the most interesting, are kind of fun, and with that cool twist, I guess you can call it a cool twist, that fun twist now, and then the way that it ties into Shang-Chi, I think adds a lot more to the entire story. Now, my number 20 is another combined villain, and if you don't get kind of the point, these combined villains don't work all too much for me. And at my number 20, it's Kaecullius and Dormammu. Now, Dormammu and Kaecullius go hand in hand. I think Dormammu is one of the freakiest villains from the comics, and in the way they used him, I understand they weren't trying to make him look too much like Ghost Rider, so they went for a different approach. I imagine in future Doctor Strange movies, specifically the next one, Dormammu will probably get an added bonus just for the fact of the things that tied in at the end of Multiverse of Madness. But for me, this gets the bump because I think Mads Mikkelsen, for the material given, gives a wonderful performance and a very intimidating one at that. But other than that, I just really like the ending and the way that it's not your cliche same end fight scene. It really much is, Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Really cool fight scene, and I think that just adds to Doctor Strange's personality and how much I like him as a hero. At my number 19, we have Yellowjacket. Now, this is very much the same thing as Ant-Man, can shrink down, they have cool fight scenes, and when we look at the villain himself, there's rumors that Yellowjacket might be coming back to play in Ant-Man 3, so maybe we'll get some more development there. Other than that, he has some cool power sets, and I like his motives, but it's really not all too much for me to really jump back on the bandwagon and be like, yes! I love this villain, he's one of the best. You'll get that a lot from the Marvel villains, that there's sometimes just not a lot to say about them, but they're enjoyable for what they are. To be honest, a lot of these middling ones that I'm about to talk about will be the same thing. But for 18, we have Ghost. Now, I actually think the actress is so great in this role, and I'm really hoping we get more material with the character of Ghost. Really slick, cool movesets, as well as an awesome costume, and a motive that makes sense because she's technically dying. She needs this. Now, while the story does not dive a little bit anywhere deeper into that, I want a little bit more from this, and I'm hoping that the future of Marvel will touch in on this. There's some rumors that she might be in the Thunderbolts movie. Fingers crossed that actually happens. Now at my number 17, in one of the worst Marvel films, we had Justin Hammer. Now, I debated on putting Justin Hammer and Whiplash together, but I decided not to because I think they are both big enough characters that are separated and standalone from one another, and the rest of them I have no more that are pretty much combined. But Justin Hammer, a lot of this just goes down to Sam Rockwell's performance. We need more Sam Rockwell in the MCU. He is so damn charming and delightful in this role. And overall, I think he's fantastic as the villain in here from Hammer's Corporation. I want more of him. Besides that, if it wasn't for the performance, I think he would be way lower on this list. At my number 16 now, we have Kurt Russell's Ego the Living Planet. Now, Ego just is a dominating force who just wants to take over the entire universe, planting his seed literally in multiple different ways and trying to find someone that can spend the universe with him, with the thousands of kids that he killed and many of the different reasonings. This is a villain that, while pretty cliche in what he wants for the world, I think it's really unique, and I think Kurt Russell plays a really fantastic villain, and especially in the twist that you get when he turns on Star-Lord and you find out what is actually going on. These are the elements that I actually really appreciate in here, and especially with the Celestials and adding to the entire universe of the Marvel Universe. But besides that, ego, it just goes down to another cliche motive that we've seen so many times before. At my number 15, we have Ironmonger or Obidiah Stane. Now, again, same thing as Yellowjacket. The reason that this one's a little bit higher up is two reasons. You get Jeff Bridges playing this character, the first villain in the entire MCU itself, and I think Jeff Bridges did a phenomenal job. The second reason is I actually really like the look of Ironmonger and the way that they actually had him placed in here, plus the final fight scene between him and Iron Man is spectacular. These are elements for the reason that it is a little bit higher up on this list, but again, cliche for the reasoning of why he is doing all of what he is doing, but thank God to Jeff Bridges' performance. As we're heading into my top 14, I definitely want to remind you guys to leave your thoughts down below. I'm going to put all the villains down below in the bio. If for some reason there's one that you considered more of a villain or just one that I flat out forgot because they were probably not the best villain, make sure to leave your thoughts down below because I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on there. There is one that I'm not including in this, and that is the Eternals, just for the same fact that, you know, you had Icarus and you also have the Deviants, which I really don't think all mesh up too well. I should have included them, but you guys can include them down below yourself. At number 14, we have Red Skull. Now, I've always found Red Skull to be one of the more interesting villains in the entire Marvel universe. But when it comes down to the movies, I just think it's because of Hugo Weaving's fantastic performance. The way that the makeup is all looked and designed, this is a character that is very fascinating to watch perform, but again, does not get too much development, and I actually think they kind of mishandled Red Skull a little bit, but he is a little bit higher on this list just for the same fact that I really enjoy seeing him in live action. Which now, at my number 13, we have Cate Blanchett's Hela. Hela gets the added bonus of just being played by Cate Blanchett, who absolutely does a phenomenal job playing this character. Hela is very intimidating, she is badass, she is very hard to kill, and in fact, they had to Ragnarok, destroy all of Asgard just to defeat her. There are interesting elements when it comes down to Hela, and for me, there are elements that I really wanted a lot more from her when it comes down to the story, a little bit more development from her altogether, but besides that, if we're just ranking it on a performance and honestly some of the great action scenes that Taika gave to her, then Hela is a little bit higher than everyone else. On my number 12, we have Ultron. I love the character of Ultron, and this one does get a little bit more of an added bonus because of Marvel Studios' What If. Thankfully, because What If developed Ultron a little bit better. I feel like with that now developed from What If, as well as the movies, there's a lot of cool elements for this character that I hopefully one day think that we will get Ultron back in the MCU. James Spader does a phenomenal job voicing him, and I think he is a very intimidating foe, and especially the way that he causes so much havoc. And if you see what he does in What If, it gets that added bonus. I really like Ultron. He's not as great as he was in the comics, but overall, yeah, no, he could have been better, but I still really loved what they did with him in What If. If it wasn't for him, he would have been way lower on the list. Which now, at number 11, we have Alexander Pierce. What a fantastic twist we get within the Captain America the Winter Soldier that really much affects Cap's viewpoint going forward. And speaking of my number 11, at my number 10, we also have the Winter Soldier, which is another important storyline to kind of be told about, especially in the way that it affects Cap's whole entire life. Now, these are two that I maybe should have put together, but I decided not to because even though they are both working for Hydra, in a sense, they're both different motives. One's being mind controlled, but one does give a phenomenal performance in the way that he cannot control himself. And just in general, where the Winter Soldier goes now is the character development adds so much more to this. Plus, the action sequences are phenomenal. And Alexander Pierce, what a fantastic performance from him. On my number 9, we have Mysterio. Now, this is personal biasness. Mysterio is my favorite Spider-Man villain from the entire comic sphere, and maybe he shouldn't be as high up on this list, but he is for me because I absolutely enjoy him 1000%, especially in the way that Jake Gyllenhaal plays him. Some of his motives are not the smartest, and some of the writing of the story is not the greatest, but God, he has some of the best action scenes in the entire MCU, and absolutely, I love Mysterio in the way that they used him. Seriously enough, I could rewatch those phenomenal set pieces multiple times from Spider-Man Far From Home, but in general, Jake Gyllenhaal gives such an unhinged performance, and if you like his performance in this, go check out Michael Bay's Ambulance that came out earlier this year. That was fantastic as well. On my number 8, we have Zemo. Now, Zemo's development in Falcon and the Winter Soldier doesn't move him up anymore on this list. In fact, if it wasn't for that, I probably would have put him even higher, but after seeing what they kind of started to do with him, I'm not the biggest fan of, because I think Zemo is one of those characters that has a lot of great grit to him, and he is one of the most underrated villains villains in the entire MCU. Flat out, he's the one that broke the Avengers. And I love the way that he was able to do it, not really getting into any fights, but just being there and setting the stage for everything. He's a great manipulator, and that's one of the best things about him. And seriously enough, one of the most underrated villains in comic book history. At my number 7, a lot more people are probably going to have this a little bit higher, but at my 7, we have Loki. The reason Loki is so low, and let me just defend that, is because I look at him more as an anti-hero more than anything else as of right now. And for me, I think Tom Hiddleston can play both sides so greatly, but I've never truly grown on him so much as a villain. It always just seems that even though he has his own personal motives, he's doing it because he thinks he has nothing else to live for in his life. Now, obviously, we see later down the road that he understands that this really isn't his whole entire thing. And with the entire Loki show, we understand that he knows this now. So that's why he's a little bit lower than most people would probably have him. Oh, my number 6, we have the brand new Christian Bale, GOR the God Butcher. And the only reason he is at my number 6 is just because I wish we got maybe 1 or 2 more scenes with him within Thor Love and Thunder. Besides that, this is a very unhinged, insane performance from Christian Bale that is, in the fact, cheesy, terrifying, and absolutely horrifying. He brings this Pennywise mannerism to him that is also badass in certain ways that when he kidnaps those kids and you're sitting there, you're like, this is very intimidating. I love GOR the God Butcher, and I think they did such a phenomenal job bringing him to life. He's one of the coolest villains in the comics, and he's absolutely one of the best villains in the MCU. My number 5 is one of the best performances in the entire MCU, and that is Tony Leung's Wenwu, or the actual Mandarin. I love his performance so much, and that is the reason that it is so high up, because in fact, he is not really just much a villain. He's just someone who wants his wife back, and I love how personal his motives is, and especially in the way that it ties into the father-daughter story within Shang-Chi. One of the best performances again, and I absolutely love Wenwu. Speaking of great performances, at my number 4, we have Killmonger. I love what Michael B. Jordan was able to do with this role of Killmonger, and while yes, it's just another version of the Black Panther that he's portraying, it is one that has such a fascinating performance, and one that actually teaches T'Challa to maybe open up his eyes a little bit more and see that there is more to all of this. I was very fascinated with the way that they were able to portray this character, and I think Killmonger went out way too soon, but in the same way, in the way that he died, it was very symbolic for the entire rest of the film. And at my number 3, Vulture. Now, this is a villain in the comics I'm not a big fan of. I actually think the Spider-Man villain is kind of piss poor at times, but in the movies, the way that Michael Keaton plays the Vulture, and we are not including what they did with Morbius. I'm just going to completely disregard that because that was just complete BS. But the way that the MCU uses him, and in the way that they were able to develop this character, it made him easily become one of the best live-action Marvel villains ever hit the screen. Michael Keaton's performance is fantastic. The way that they bring about that twist was still shocking, so fun to show people who have never seen the movies before, because then it's like, oh my god, this is actually happening. And again, the action pieces between him and Spider-Man, while small in scale, are awesome. My number 2, we have Wanda Maximoff. Now, seeing her journey from being a hero all the way to actually being a villain is something that a lot of people maybe thinks is a little bit too fast. For me, I love what they were able to do with Wanda Maximoff, and I cannot wait to see what they do next with her story, because let's be honest, she did not die. There's still story to be told with her, and I've become obsessed with her stuff from the comics, and actually seeing what they could furtherly do with her character, there are great elements to preside that, again, may finally take her off this list, but for the sake of this list, she was the villain in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and she is one of the best villains in the entire franchise, and a lot of that goes to Elizabeth Olsen's performance. Of course, at my number 1, it is Josh Brolin's Thanos. There's nothing more to say than Thanos is one of the best Marvel, and not just Marvel, best comic book villains of all time. Adapting a character from the comics who could have came off very bland, comes off in a very personable way by giving him his own film pretty much in Avengers Infinity War, to the point where you understand and kind of start to go, okay, yes, I understand what you're trying to do, but there might be other ideas that you could rectify this all. And he becomes a very imposing force, whether in strength, brutality, or just in general his determination. This is a performance that is absolutely unlike any other, and I love Brolin in the way that he portrayed Thanos. Absolutely the best MCU villain still. Guys, that's all the MCU villains ranked worst to best, including GOR the God Butcher. Let me know down below what your guys' thoughts are on this list. Do you guys agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let's talk about it down below, as well as make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to tune in to more lists like this. I love talking movies, and I have a lot of early movie reviews coming up very soon. So thank you so much again for watching this. Head on over to Samtron Films on how to see films early, and of course, until next time, stay classy.